Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the new American wasteland. I'm your host, Montgomery Ho, and the year is 2035. You're still doing your best to survive in your home state. Despite the federal and state government losing total control of the area, you've managed to get by, if only just barely. But finally, some good news. Local broadcasts and social media have made you aware of a relief group that's arrived in the town center. Rumors are that they have food, water, and doctors for the local population. When you get to the relief area, there are throngs of civilians, mostly folks that look like you, weathered, tired, and just holding on for the next stroke of good luck. They're all gathering around a group of men and women in uniform. However, this isn't the U.S. military. Different camouflage patterns with different national insignia, all under blue helmets emblazoned with UN in blocky white letters. Most of them are distributing water and food rations from trucks. Others are gathering and triaging American civilians into the medical tents. Some stand guard, all speak in heavily accented English. The Canadian and United Kingdom troops are guiding and directing most of the civilians, while Korean, Spaniard, and French troops are distributing much-needed supplies. You're relieved. For the first time in months, you finally feel a bit safer, and you may finally eat and drink decently tonight. But then, you hear it, the familiar crack of rifle fire. Then suddenly, a staccato of snaps, whizzes, and ricochets. Dozens of civilians go down, and the non-commissioned officers from the UN are already barking orders at both civilians and relief troops. In a panic, you try to find hard cover, but the chaos leaves you disoriented. A firm grip grabs your collar. The Canadian corporal that had just earlier been directing you to the water truck with a friendly face now has the stern demeanor of a cold veteran. She gets you behind the water truck, and as you turn to thank your savior, her body slumps. Suddenly and lifelessly, with blood gushing from a rifle wound in her side. By 2035, the UN had been sending relief forces on humanitarian missions into the US to assist civilians that the American federal and state governments either couldn't or wouldn't protect. You're desperately trying to make yourself smaller behind the water truck as chaos ensues around you. Gunfire is everywhere, and you feel like any exposed portion of your body will be blown off. The UN trooper that saved you is now being worked on by a Canadian medic. Her eyes are open still, and seem to stare through your soul as the medic is pulling off her Kevlar and trying to get to the wound. More and more American civilians scramble behind the ever-shrinking cover of the UN vehicles. What few UN troopers are left are mounting a well-organized but more and more desperate defense against the attackers that ambush the relief area. Their heavy weapons, vehicle-mounted heavy machine guns, and automatic grenade launchers keeping the assailants at bay. A French trooper pushes you behind the wheel well of the vehicle and fires from the corner of the truck. He looks young, maybe about 19, about how old your brother is, or would have been. You don't understand who would do this. Who would attack a square full of civilians and people trying to keep them alive? It becomes clear when the squad radio man is yelling into the comms over the gunfire. Ground team to Paladin. Ground team to Paladin. Troops in contact. Heavy casualties. Jadoville. 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 Fundies everywhere. The thought is sobering and infuriating. Fundies, Seppies, Dominionists, the ISIS of America, they all meant the same thing about the same people out here. Religious extremists that saw the crumbling of America as their opportunity to create the country they wanted everyone to live in. When the UN started its relief missions, the talking heads and fear-mongering media jockeys that helped usher in this era saw an opportunity to spur their base even further. They called the UN invaders that were coming to end the American way of life, take their guns and their children. Luckily, the UN had something the Fundies didn't, and it was screaming down on them like the hammer of God. As the deafening sound of helicopter blades rises in the air, the fire from the Fundies lessens. They realize their mistake. The smart ones try to flee. The less experienced ones fire their rifles hopelessly at the inbound helicopters. But none of it matters when the autocannons begin to chatter. You can't hear anything now, not even your own voice as you yell out gibberish. Just the absence of sound for what seems like forever. Then it comes, the ringing, a painfully high-pitched tone that feels like it'll split your skull. It lessens after a few minutes, enough that you realize one of the Peacekeeper's medics is looking you over, loudly asking you if you're wounded in a thick accent. You can't think of a response for some reason, and simply nod and give him the thumbs up. He quickly moves over to the next set of civilians cowering behind the trucks. You finally look around and attempt to get your bearings. Your first instinct is to stand up before the young French peacekeeper from before pulls you right back down. Stay down until we give the all clear, okay? You simply nod, realizing the gunfire isn't there anymore. No one is shooting, just the loud drone of the helicopter circling from a safe distance overhead, and someone nearby sobbing uncontrollably. Taking in your surroundings, you realize you're not the only American amongst the peacekeepers' vehicles. Civilians all around you, maybe 24 or so, are clutching themselves or each other, some rocking back and forth, and all shaking. Something hot and wet pools around your hand. With a glance, you realize it's blood. In a panic, you pat yourself down, checking for a gunshot wound the medic missed. As you're frantically checking, you see it's coming from the Frenchman's leg. You're hit, you say to him with a stutter. Never pulling his cheek from the stock of his rifle, he responds, "Left cargo pocket, on my leg, tourniquet." You unbutton the pocket, fishing out the tourniquet and fastening it over the wound. You cinch it down. The Frenchman doesn't move at all. Like the other peacekeepers, he's leaning against the vehicle, still as a statue. The only movement amongst the vehicles are the shuddering Americans and the lone UN medic making rounds amongst them. Not everyone behind the vehicles were safe. Several peacekeepers are slumped against one of the trucks, some unmoving and all bloodied. Next to them lie more civilians. There just wasn't enough cover from the gunfire for everyone that was trying to get away from the fusillade. The radio man calls out to the squad, "Hold fire to the north! CDF is coming in!" CDF, the Community Defense Force. You'd heard of them, but only seen them in passing. Volunteer defense forces that gave aid, protection, and skills to the area where the UN couldn't. A young girl, a teenager, trots through the vehicles with a rifle in her hands and a blue bandana tied on her arm. You're not hit, right? We need help moving the wounded. This has been Letters from 2035. I'm your host, Montgomery Ho, and I'm reminding you to stay safe out there.
Stop what you're doing. Stop ingesting this doom